What's up, everybody? How are you doing? Today we're going to be doing an Imoti Celebrant a Bounty deck tech. The deck list is in the description below, but before we get started, here's a little disclaimer.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing? I just wanted to put this little disclaimer at the start of every deck tech I do going forward. The objective of deck techs on this channel is we're going to create a commander deck that is as powerful as possible without it being a CEDH deck, focusing on the synergy or the deck's gimmick. Sometimes we'll do meme builds, but we're not going to make our meme build just bulk city. We're going to try and make it work as well as we can. We are going to use commander staples like Mana Crypt and Rhystic Study to sort of glue our strategy together and make it as powerful as it could be for what we're doing. That's sort of what I'm getting at. Our deck list is also going to focus more on the solitaire side of Magic, where you're just sort of doing your own thing, unless it's a interaction-heavy deck, and that's the whole point. The reason I do this is because every meta is different, every play group's different. So if you want more interaction in your deck, you don't have to tell me the deck has no interaction. That's sort of something I baked into it. And we're going to avoid just jamming combos into decks unless they directly synergize with the commander or the overall deck. Like, I'm going to play Walking Ballista if I make a Heliod Suncrown deck, or I would play Druid's Repository if I built a Najeela deck. But we're not going to shoehorn Demonic Thoracle into something just because it's blue and black. I know that's like a CEDH win condition, and I already said we're not going to do that. But I just wanted to make things like that clear. Unless it matches the entire deck, we probably won't play it just as a combo. But other than that, please enjoy the video. Subscribe if you like it. I plan to do a bunch more. Have a good day.
Now that disclaimer is done, we're going to be here going over the lands first. A lot of it is pretty simple. We got about 7 basic islands in the deck and about 12 basic forests before we get into our non-basic lands. And the reason why there's so many more forests than islands is because we don't actually have that many. Well, we technically have 0 turn 1 blue plays, and we have a bunch of turn 1 green plays. Other than that, though, our mana is pretty good in a 2-color deck. Got a ping land, or whatever you call it. Got the Modern Horizons 1 land. Urza Saga. We make very good use out of colorless mana in this deck, especially with our commander being 5 mana. Our commander's over half colorless, so you're going to see a good bit of colorless stuff. Tropical Island, because I put my money where my mouth is. Otawara Soaring City. The bounce on this actually is mostly for your permanents to save yours. However, bouncing your opponent's shit is never bad. Just a very stark upgrade on island. Recommend for most decks. Misty Rainforest, a little bit of color fixing. Hinterland Harbor, obviously. Filterland, hard to argue in a 2-color deck. Command Tower, auto-include, serial numbered, by the way. Breeding Pool, obviously it's Breeding Pool. The Bark Channel Pathways, absolutely stellar in 2-color decks. An Ancient Tomb, although I wish this was normal Ancient Tomb and not Balin's Tomb, but that's what you get when you open packs. You don't get exactly what you want. So the land's pretty basic. There's really no super synergies with the lands. One notable mention, though, you can add is if you want to play Hedge Maze, you may. But I'm tap land phobic, if you will. I have a phobia of playing tap lands in my deck. I feel like they'll make me lose 100% of the time. But we're going to play a bunch of ramp spells that pull lands out of the deck, notably forests and islands. So if you want to play Hedge Maze, I more than encourage you to do so. Next, we're going to be getting into artifacts. First, we're going to go over the artifacts that don't create mana, because there's not that many, and most of the other deck is ramp, as you'll see. Lightning Greaves protects your commander. Giving things haste is a really big deal in this deck. The One Ring is pretty broken in all situations, and you're going to have a lot of ways to bounce it. The One Ring is notably worse in decks that don't win all at once. And this deck doesn't really do that. So What makes the One Ring an include in this is we play so much ramp and colorless spells that we're able to just sort of rip through our deck and play a bunch of things, and eventually with the Hullbreaker, Horror, Ties About Tyrant, Odawara, we can bounce the One Ring and stop it from killing us. And also maybe baits out opponent's counterspell. Very good card in this deck. Camille, the Inner Sun, when you play big, expensive spells, getting them countered is obviously a feels bad man. But also we get a pseudo cascade at our end step, and we play enough extra turns to where I thought this might be a pretty spicy include. I think it's a very good card. And that'll do us for artifacts that don't produce mana. So we're going to get into the ones that do, which there's a good bit. Lotus Petal needs no introduction. Commander Sphere, you could probably switch that out if you wanted. Felwar Stone is mediocre. Everflowing Chalice, don't sleep on this one in this deck. That bridge of being able to make this cost 4 mana, 6 mana, 8 mana, 2 mana is very good. It's not something you should neglect. I think that this is a sleeper card in this deck. Thran Dynamo is always cool. Grim Monolith is more of an expensive as far as budget goes card, but I find you'll think it's very worth it. When we go down the deck and see some of our newer lines, Talisman of Curiosity. Talismans are broken in 2-color decks. Soul Ring, need no introduction. Simic Signet, 2-color deck. Who'd have thought? Mind Stone is like a slightly better Everflowing Chalice you play for 2 mana. And then also it's a card later, and that card later is actually a really big deal. So your hand doesn't get stranded. Mana Volt, need no introduction. Mana Crypt needs even less introduction. Jeweled Lotus, you could cut this if you wanted. I'm more so playing this because I think it's good. You might be able to play your commander and something on the same turn, and it allows you to sort of play Jeweled Lotus in a more, how do I say it, a more of a thinking man's perspective, because a lot of times with Jeweled Lotus, you play it instantly, play your commander. I think with this deck, there's a little bit of thinking to go into it. However, cascading for a random 4-drop and having your commander in play, it's hard to go wrong with this card. Commander ever dies, it's 7 mana. Jewel Lotus takes some of that edge off. Hedron Archive is just Mind Stone that costs 4. However, I think that the drawing 2 cards on this and just getting that more mana is worth it to play. And then Arcane Signet. Arcane Signet, man, how can you hate? So that'll do it for artifacts. Now we're going to get into creatures. Alright, so these are going to be all the creatures we play in reverse alphabetical order. Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger is incredibly broken. I think everyone just about hates this card. Playing against it, that is. Can't even hate. It's just good. It's just good. Everyone knows it's good. Vorinclex, you could cut this one. However, I just wanted a reason, an excuse to play this version of Vorinclex that I got. Shout out to me, I guess. But really, you could cut this. However, not cutting it, I'm on the fence about it. I might just keep it in there for the rest of time, just because that ability and the great evolution. Some of these aren't too bad. Mill 10 cards, put 2 creature cards from among the milled cards onto the battlefield. A lot of the times you will not whiff. The 2's kind of ass, but the 3, being able to fight things infinitely when you have indestructible creatures such as Ulamog in play, being able to just clear the board, that's a good bit of value. Having a one-sided board wipe, Kindred Dominance kind of effect is incredible to have in green and blue. So we'll see. You can take it out if you'd like. Void Winnower, very high CMC. Let's activate our cascades and his sort of stacks. This has to be a personal like favorite kind of card. Is a big creature that stacks. Fat ass mana cost, fast stat bar, stacks. That's probably my favorite kind of creature. Besides one that rip ass like Ulamog and Ulamog. Obviously, everyone knows these cards. The staple of all big mana, big creature decks. Can't go wrong. And back to Lightning Greaves getting this guy haste. Out of this world. We got the serial numbered Tidespout Tyrant. This card is one of the strongest cards in the deck. If this deck is winning too consistently against your friend group, I would aim for Tidespout Tyrant and, spoiler alert, Hullbreaker Horror. It goes infinite with Mana Volt plus other mana rock for the most part. Any 0 mana rock like Jeweled Lotus with Soul Ring goes infinite. Mana Crypt plus Arcane Signet goes infinite, just like Arcane Signet Mana Volt. There's a lot of lines to get infinite mana with Tidespout Tyrant, but even if you don't want to do that or anything else, or can't do that, we'll say, for the sake of argument, having this in play, when you cascade into something and cast it, it actually will trigger a Tidespout Tyrant because you are casting it. You are not just simply copying it or however else you would not get a cast trigger. With Tidespout Tyrant, all the times you cascade, it will trigger. You can bounce a lot of things very efficiently, very quickly. This card sees play in CEDH for a reason. Nezahal, Primal Tide. Just another Timmy card. Some of the cards you'll notice in this deck are pretty Timmy, and that's just to keep the power level from being too spiky and too high. But also Nezahal is pretty good. It's a draw engine in a deck that could use a lot of draw. Plays a lot of mana acceleration and ramp, and protects itself with cards you don't need, like lands that stack up. Memnarch, it just triggers Imoti. It's sort of a pet card of mine, however, it is an outlet for infinite mana, and playing it in the mid game, a lot of people don't like it, so a lot of people will use resources to kill it rather than some of your other cards like Tidespout Tyrant or Hullbreaker Horror. It's a okay card, very easily cuttable though. Lotus Cobra, I figured why not? We play ramp that pulls lands out the deck. You want to hit your land drops. Blah, blah, blah. Land of War Elves doesn't need justifying. Kozilek, same reason as Ulamog, but a little different. Having Annihilator 4, being able to give it haste with the Lightning Greaves. Having a high CMC so we can cascade into a bunch of stuff in the deck. It's always good. Can't complain if you're casting it. Jin Gitaxias, Progress Tyrant. I love this card for the same reason I love Void Winnower. Big cost, big stacks. It very easily can overshadow. And one thing that's cool, if you have Jin Gitaxias, Progress Tyrant in play and you cascade into one of the extra turns in this deck, you will get 2 extra turns. This card can run away with the game and slow your opponents down. I think this is one of the most sleeper good cards that exists right now, and especially in this deck, you make very good use of it. Any deck that is light on counter magic makes great use of this because you get a little bit of incremental value. Even if your opponent just plays a spell they don't need, they sort of like get their Dark Ritual countered, and then Swords to Plowshares it, you still got a 2 for 1. And if you cascaded into it, you got a 0 for 2, essentially. So very good card, very strong. I would definitely pick one up for this deck if you decide to build it. Jin Gitaxias Core Augur. We don't have a bunch of ways to especially cheat. You're probably going to have to pay for that. That 10 cost fairly. 10 is an awkward number to cascade into because it's only it that betrays Ulamog that really can hit it. But the effect is just so powerful that you can't not play it. Right? And we have a bunch of other Praetors, so can't not play it. It that betrays, as I noted before, it lets you cascade into, it is the most expensive card in the deck. It lets you cascade into potentially anything. And giving it haste is really good. Hullbreaker Horror fulfills the same job as Tidespout Tyrant. Can't be countered. Always something to not sleep on. And lets you bounce a bunch of your opponent's most important things. Obviously, will trigger on cascades the same way as Tidespout Tyrant, but it is worse in the fact that it doesn't hit lands. Elvish Spirit Guide, you could cut this for maybe another mana dork, but I think just having that ability to just sort of like get a mana real quick, like a Lotus Petal kind of effect, can really put you over the edge. The difference between casting a spell and not casting a spell is incredibly huge in this deck. Cuttable, but I think very good. Elvish Mystic. It's Elvish Mystic. Emrakul Promised End is just, actually I lied. This is the most expensive card in the deck, not It That Betrays. So, but also discounts itself. Blah, blah, blah. Just good. You can take control of someone and pretty much goad all their creatures, maybe interact with the other players. Very, very good card. Don't sleep. Delighted Halfling makes things uncounterable, and in a deck with very little counter magic, it is incredibly good. Consecrated Sphinx. Card advantage in this deck is important. There's not a lot of card draw in it per se. You just sort of get value on what you do draw, and you do it pretty reliably. But getting a Consecrated Sphinx, even for something like free, like off the Cascade, it does its fair share of work. It really does. It does good. It does its job. It triggers Imoti itself. Very strong card. Bow Reel Druid. Bloom Tender. Taps for only 2 mana in this, as opposed to maybe tapping 5 in something like First Sliver, or a huge variety of other 5 mana commanders. I still think it's good enough to play, although I will admit in other decks it makes it seem like a bad choice to put in here, but I think that's only because of how strong it is in 5-color decks. I still think it's worth it to play. If you don't want to, take it out. Birds of Paradise is Birds of Paradise. And Apex Devastator is actually one of the best cards in this deck, being as though if you were to have Imoti out, and for the same reason Tidespout Tyrant will trigger, if you Apex Devastator and then Cascade into something that costs 6 or greater, it will trigger Imoti an additional time. So having these two cards together, if you have your commander out, Apex Devastator is potentially one of the best cards in the entire deck. So, cuttable, but, you know, if you're going to play this deck, this is the one card that's sort of like unoptimal and blah, 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 that you might as well just play Kinnan. If you're like, I don't want to play Apex Devastator, just play Kinnan. What are you doing here? All right, next we're going to get into Planeswalkers. The only Planeswalker into the deck is Ugin. It triggers Imoti. It's really all there is to it. Your commander is expensive enough to where you can minus X Ugin for a high enough cost that will disrupt your opponents, but not get rid of your commander. You can cascade into it for free if you're casting super big spells and just having targeted removal and green-blue, especially when a lot of people's commanders usually don't cost more than 3, or even if they do, they don't have more than 3 health a good bit of the time. Very strong card. I think this is really the only Planeswalker that can see play in Commander, besides the Teferi that can be activated on other players' turns. I think this is one of the only Planeswalkers that sees can see play in Commander, essentially. Next, we're going to go on to Sorceries. Alright, so now that we are in Sorceries, we got Mass Manipulation. So Mass Manipulation is very cuttable in this deck, but I like it a lot because when you can gain control of someone's commander, a lot of people don't know, but they are not allowed to say, I put it in the command zone instead. It is not something you choose. It never leaves play. You just get it. So very strong card. If you pay enough into X, it will cascade or trigger Imoti, I should say. So very good, very strong card. In my opinion, if you want to cut it, you may. I don't think you should. Walk the Aeons. That buyback is vicious. It costs 6, so it'll trigger Imoti, but also costs 6, so a lot of your big spells will let you get into this. This is one of the best hits to hit, and you could potentially buy it back by sacking 3 islands. If you want to add more islands to the deck, you may, if you want this to be more consistent, but I think that taking just 1 free extra turn if you cascade into it is good enough, especially if you just cast it from hand. You'll get a spell that costs 5 or less for free. 3 visits lets you get a forest, so you can get Tropical Island, you can get Breeding Pool first. If you wanted to play Hedge Maze like I recommended you might want to, you can get that too. So it'll come into play untapped, all that good stuff. Trigger Lotus Cobra. Good thing. Sky Shroud Claim is scaled 3 visits. It'll adjust in Nature's Lore, so you pay double the cost, but you get double the same effect. Very good. Rampant Growth. Everyone knows Rampant Growth, but, you know, Nature's Lore is literally 3 visits with a different name. natural order. Pretty much the only thing you do with this card is sometimes you'll get it from Imoti and then you sacrifice a mana dork, or it's very often worth it to sack your commander to go and get Vorinclex, and that's really the only hit in the deck. So it's sort of like just okay, but when you rip it on turn 3, or you really wouldn't hit it any sooner unless you got super lucky, like Mana Crypt, Elf, pass, and the next turn you land and did it. It's very hard to do it incredibly early, but I think it's worth enough, and that Vorinclex is so worth it to slow your opponents down and accelerate your mana, that I think playing that little triage of cards is worth it. Migration Path, you could cycle it if it's late enough into the game. A random card might be better. However, hitting this off of Imoti is really good. Harmonize is one of those cards I put in here to keep it a little Timmy, keep this deck a little silly, a little loosey and goosey. Very justifiable cut, but it's pretty cool when you hit it off Imoti. It's hard to disagree. Farseek, you can't actually get forests when you do this, which I think is hilarious, but it still lets you get Trop Island, although you will get Breeding Pool because you want to get Breeding Pool because the land will come into play tapped no matter what. So you get Breeding Pool instead of Trop Island, or you could get Hedge Maze if you decide to play it. So, pretty cool. Explore needs no introduction. Explore was Simic before Simic was Simic. And Beacon of Tomorrows. This will obviously trigger Imoti, but it shuffling back in is a huge deal, because if you are start to get to the point where you'll draw it again, you can get infinite cascades and get whatever you need to. Playing your land drops, drawing a bunch of cards, attacking with big creatures. Having the infinite turn style effect when your deck is thin enough, or maybe you just get lucky enough to keep on drawing it with between, some of the card draw that's in the deck, or maybe just playing big creatures and cascading into it. It triggering Imoti itself is a really big deal and can get out of hand very quickly, especially with certain setup cards like Jin-Gitaxias Progress Tyrant. So, that being said, that's that. Now we're going to get into instants. Alright, so starting off hot, we have Nexus of Fate. It is exactly the same reasoning as Beacon of Tomorrows. However, it is instant speed, if that might matter. Triggers Imoti, all that good stuff. Mana Drain is pretty much one of the only counter spells in the deck, but it's Mana Drain, and we use the shit out of colorless mana. Mana Drain is one of those cards to where it goes in every blue deck, whether you don't want the power in your play group or you don't have the budget. Cutting it is what it is. However, it's one of those cards that goes in every deck that is blue. It just is counterspell with such an outrageous upside that I'm surprised it's not banned in Commander. It just seems silly. It seems stupid to have it in the format. I don't understand it personally, but then one tidbit of knowledge: if you were to mana drain a uncounterable spell, you will still get the mana of that spell's CMC. So it's not even like if they don't let you counter the spell, it doesn't matter. It'll matter. Cyclonic Rift is Cyclonic Rift. Unfortunately, the overload cost will not trigger Imoti. Is what it is, but it's hard to argue against it. Cryptic Command is in this deck. It's one of the worst counter spells, in my opinion, that exist in general in the format. However, I wanted the deck to not play a bunch of counters because I wanted my Imoti cascades to be incredibly strong. Oh yeah, and one thing about Mana Drain real quick, I forgot to mention that Mana Drain, if you were to cascade into something like ridiculous or like something like Apex Devastator, like if you Apex Devastator and you hit Mana Drain, you can technically counter Apex Devastator to next turn have 10 mana. You can do that if you would like. It's an option. Don't forget you are able to do that. But Cryptic Command lets you cascade into it with Imoti, and you're able to bounce and draw a card. So you can technically Rip this, it's a counter spell you can cascade into with Imoti, and it's not dead, so that's why we play it. Beast Within, cool little cascade thing. Destroying something is usually pretty good in this format, especially something that stops your game plan. So Archmage's Charm has the exact same reasoning behind Cryptic Command, although I think it's generally a better card. Drawing 2 cards instead of 1 over Cryptic Command, but don't sleep on that last mode of taking control of target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 1 or less. You can take Soul Rings, you can take Elves, you can do a bunch, although usually you will probably draw 2 cards. And that'll do it for instants. Last we have Enchantments. So in our enchantments, there's nothing completely crazy. There's Wild Growth. Wild Growth is pretty busted. It's the same mana as a elf, but it cannot be killed by creature removal or board wipes, what have you. It makes the mana a little harder to spend in general, because when you tap the land you get to, you cannot tap them individually of each other. However, with a deck where that doesn't really care about instant speed, it really doesn't matter. It's like almost strictly an elf you cannot kill. I choose not to play Utopia Sprawl because we play a good bit of lands that are not forests. However, between if you wanted to play more fetch lands and all the things we rip out the deck that's a forest, tropical island, breeding pool, you could play Utopia Sprawl, but I think it would make your deck inconsistent. Up the Beanstalk is a pretty Imoti based card. It's a lot cheaper now that it's banned in Modern for an uncommon, that is. It's good. Once you play it and then your commander, it's 2 mana, draw 2. Anything past that is busted. Sylvan Library, one of those cards that can kind of go in every single green deck, no matter what. Pretty cool cascade. Decree of Silence is a pet card. There's no super synergy with it. However, it is a counterspell that you could choose to play. That'll draw you a card. However, ripping it off a cascade and it cascading Imoti or triggering Imoti itself, very good. I love this card. It's one of my favorite cards. If you don't want to play it, I wouldn't be mad, but I just like to play it. I like it. So Rhystic Study needs no introduction. It's one of those cards we slapped in this deck to maybe make it a little more competitive with certain decks and certain matchups. And our deck really just sort of has a very linear, very slow game plan in general as far as winning the actual game goes. So it's a nice little way to slow down your opponents and or refill your hand. Mystic Remora is the same sort of job. And I guess I lied earlier in the video saying we had no turn 1 blue plays. But our mana is consistent enough and we have so much more green in the deck that I still agree with my land distribution. Counterbalance is easily a cut. I also just play this card because I like it. Because your deck is so freaking expensive, usually Counterbalance won't hit anything. And I understand that. I know that. I play it because I like it. But I'll probably end up taking it out for something like Growth Spiral in the future. But that is the deck. That is the entire deck tech. I'm going to do a separate video, just to keep this one a little more concise, where I'm doing test hands. And that one will be called How to Play Imoti, Celebrant of Bounty. So I'm going to do that one right now. And if y'all would like to, and y'all would like to watch that one where I sort of pilot the deck playing solitaire and show y'all how to do it, see some lines you maybe don't see just from this, that video will be available soon. So I hope everyone has a good day. I hope you enjoyed the deck tech. Subscribe if you don't mind. I really am trying to hit 1,000 subs so I can start getting paid, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. But I hope everyone enjoyed the video. Thank you so much.
Previous.